They brought me back for my name. That was the only reason I ever gave people. It was true enough. When the Navy pulls an old captain out of retirement, they do not start with small talk. They put you in a windowless room, lay out the maps, and let the silence do the work. The wall display showed the ocean floor in false relief. A trench like a tear. Depth numbers, gravity drift, neat annotations where survey teams had tried to resolve odd readings and failed. Every loop of data around a particular patch spread out instead of narrowing. A spray of question marks printed in clean digital ink. The man at the head of the table wore an admiral's pins. The other suits and uniforms belonged to people who cared about different types of loss. Some counted hulls, some counted crews, some counted payouts. You know why you're here, Captain Vogel. He used my rank instead of my first name. That told me more than any briefing packet. You want me to front your circus? I answered. Give it weight. Make it sound respectable. He did not argue. We have a joint research and recovery mission, he went on. Officially, mapping and wreck documentation. Unofficially, you will keep that crew from tearing itself apart when things get strange. You have the record for deep deployments, and you do not talk to reporters. I looked back at the map. The trench cut across the display. A cluster of red tags sat over one part of it, like someone had jabbed that spot with a needle again and again. Mass drift values ran in a line along the side. They never settled. Every reading taken there slid away from the last. How long have you been watching this patch? I traced the cluster with a finger. Decades, an insurance man answered. He wore a pin with his firm's emblem on his tie, as if to remind everyone why he was allowed in a Navy room. Every time someone spends a fortune on deep gravity surveys, that region turns up. Always a little off. Always too expensive to chase further. The Admiral tapped the table. Ships have gone missing along the approach corridors to that trench. Officially, storms, piracy, hidden reefs, all the standard causes. Unofficially, we are not satisfied with that. I recognized some of the hull names on the loss list scrolling in a side panel. Old sail training ships, an ironclad under experimental orders, Second World War destroyers, a missile boat lost on silent patrol, a container ship whose court case had clogged maritime courts for years. He did not mention the ones we never admitted were there. And now? I asked. Now the insurers are willing to pay enough to justify sending a long-range research boat, the tie-pin man answered. And navies are nervous enough to lend crews equipment and clearance. We all want to know what sits down there. Not what? One of the science people cut in. How? He was thin and pale from more time with data than sunlight. The mass drift is the point. Something in that region refuses to hold a stable reading. Gravity surveys go in and the numbers slide. It's like trying to weigh a moving load. He caught himself and glanced at the Admiral. Not my field, Captain. I only watch the numbers. I thought about it. I had always been good at thinking about bad orders instead of refusing them outright. That was why they had called me now. Who commands the boat? I asked. Commander Pierce holds the captain's chair, the Admiral answered. You are senior liaison and figurehead commander. You smooth relations, read the crew, advise. Officially, you reassure everyone. Unofficially, if discipline falters, you step in. So when things fall apart, I own it. Correct. At least we were honest. That was better than some of the games I had played in earlier tours. What exactly do you expect to find? I looked from one face to another. An admiral, 2 scientists, an intelligence colonel, 3 insurer representatives, a small tribunal of different fears. Best case, the science man said, a peculiar patch of crust, maybe a dense metallic body under the trench, something that explains the drift and nothing else. Worst case, an ongoing phenomenon that interacts with ships in a way we do not understand. The insurers have already priced the worst case, the tie-pin man added. We're just tired of paying for it in ignorance. I watched the map a moment longer. Fine, You get your old captain. You get his discretion. You also get his mouth. I do not fight men I cannot see, but I will fight panic. If you ask me to lie to my crew, we end this now. No lies on the boat. The Admiral met my eyes. Afterward, we will see. We shook hands. Paperwork followed. The same forms I had signed many times before with different dates and mission codes. Promises to keep quiet, to obey lawful orders, and to own my failures quietly. By the time the pen left the last page, my life was once again measured in deployments. The research submarine sat in dry dock under floodlights, half myth and half compromise. A hull stretched for range, a hybrid of military lines and civilian accommodations, bristling with sensors and manipulator bays instead of torpedo tubes. Painted a neutral grey that did not quite match any nation's fleet. When I climbed the gangway, the air felt more familiar than the quiet in my inland house ever had. Steel around me, cables overhead, men and women moving with purpose and boredom in equal parts. Commander Pierce met me at the hatch. Younger by decades, lean, dark hair cropped to regulation, eyes that had lived mostly in operations centers instead of on decks. Captain Vogel, good to have you aboard. He offered a hand, firm grip. I watched his expression more than his words. Some captains resented an older officer planted on their bridge. Some welcomed the cover. You run the boat, I told him. I'm here to keep all the partners from clawing at each other when instruments start misbehaving. I'll take whatever help I can get, he answered. Mixed personnel, mixed doctrine, mixed contracts. If something goes wrong at depth, everyone will blame the flag that suits them. We walked the narrow passage together. He introduced key people as we went. Tally, senior sonar operator, Navy-born, quick eyes and restless hands on his controls. He carried the relaxed disrespect of someone who knew his work mattered more than rank. Peña, chief engineer, short and solid, grease under his nails even on inspection days. He had been in engine rooms longer than some of the crew had been alive. Dr. Ashwin, civilian oceanographer and science lead, tablet in hand. Lindholm, liaison from the insurer side, soft around the middle, watchful, always near the center of any conversation that involved risk. A handful of contractors from a deep systems firm handled the remote vehicles, each more comfortable with equipment than with officers. Most of the rest were standard naval crew from different countries under a joint protocol banner. Their patches carried 3 flags and a mission emblem, some committee's idea of unity. I made quiet notes on each face, each posture, who looked like they would hold in a crisis, who watched others instead of the panel in front of them, who tried too hard to impress. We ran through checklists, stores loaded, external hatches sealed, final codes exchanged with the dock tower. When the ballast tanks flooded and the boat settled off her supports, the vibration came up through my boots. There is a particular quiet that follows launch, when the ship leaves one world and is not yet committed to the next. We went down. Descent stayed ordinary until the first readings slipped. For a while, numbers behaved. Depth rose at the planned rate. Exterior pressure crept up. Hull stress stayed in the green. Sonar showed only gentle slopes and open blue. Pierce lounged in the command chair. Tally watched his screens with mild boredom. Ashwin tracked gravity sensor readings as they trickled in. Once we crossed the target depth line, the world narrowed. The trench walls climbed around us. Sonar painted steep faces dropping into darker shades, with occasional outcrops and ledges. "Entering Survey Zone Alpha," Ashwin announced. "Gravity readings nominal." He hunched over his console, one earbud in, fingers flicking through overlays. "Keep us on track. Steady incline," Pierce ordered. "No heroics on this run." The gravity readings began to shift as we approached the marked region. At first it looked like noise. Numbers drifted a little high, then a little low, each sweep giving a slightly different result for the same patch of water. Ashwin frowned. Getting into the patch, he muttered. Look here. I leaned over his shoulder. The graph on his screen should have shown a calm line with minor waves. Instead, it jittered, each point sliding on its own. Instrument fault? I asked. He ran a quick check with a gesture. Calibrations hold. Hardware tests are clean. This is external. Plotted over time, I told him. He overlaid 2 passes. Where surveyors expect convergence, his lines wriggled apart. It won't settle, he murmured. That gave us our first confirmation that the trench deserved its reputation. We adjusted speed, trimmed ballast, eased deeper along the planned track. Sensors swept ahead. The darkness outside was complete. Only sonar gave shape to anything beyond the hull. Contact, Tally reported. Large structure ahead. Multiple hard returns, vertical stack. Range? Pierce asked. Few hundred meters and closing. Height? High. Extends beyond current scan window. Bring up forward cameras, Pierce ordered. There would be nothing to see yet, but habitual orders anchor nervous hands. On sonar, the returns sharpened. A tall column stood out against the trench face, made of overlapping shapes. No clear bottom, no clear top. Just a vertical forest of shadows. As we closed, cameras finally picked up forms in the beams. At first it looked like wreckage on a cliff. Then the resolution crept up and the picture changed. Ships, dozens of them, hanging in open water. Some were hulked sailing vessels with splintered masts and hulls of dark, aged wood. Others were squat ironclads. Lean Second World War destroyers bristled with gun mounts. Sleek submarines jammed sideways in the tangle. A fat modern container ship sat in there too, its rows of boxes twisted apart. Every hull aimed its bow toward a central void we could not see. Closer to that invisible center, metal and wood warped, drawn out of shape, ribs showing through, decks bent like wet cardboard. Water streamed past us, flowing toward the column. It did not feel like current from any normal ocean feature. It took hold of the boat in a steady inward pull, like a hand on the hull. The thrusters fought to hold position. Easy, I murmured. Do not let it take the nose. Pierce corrected trim. Painter reported from engineering that thrust outputs were up, but within limits. Ashwin spoke without looking up. Inward mass flow confirmed, water volume moving toward a point at the center. No measurable outflow. Where does it go then? Lindholm leaned on the back of a chair, eyes fixed on the wrecks. Nowhere we can see, Ashwin answered. I watched the column. I knew many of those hull types on site. I could pick flags even when paint had peeled and rust had eaten through. I named them quietly, mostly to myself. Late sail training ship, early steel cruiser, Second World War destroyer under foreign flag, a missile submarine that never came home from patrol. I remembered rumors of its last transmission. Then I saw marks that did not fit. On one twisted hull nearer the center, a symbol showed through scraped paint. A circle cut with 3 horizontal lines, none of them belonging to any navy I knew. Another vessel had an unfamiliar arrangement of missile tubes, more advanced than anything currently deployed. The column stretched up and down beyond our lights, a forest of dead ships all pointed inward, all slowly twisting as they slid toward the unseen core. Now you have your worst case, I told the Admiral in my memory. And it is very much still happening. We did what we were paid to do. We watched. We sent out drones. Remote vehicles eased out from launch bays, lights probing the tangle. They trailed tethers feeding power and data back to us, moving with the caution that comes from knowing there is no one outside to fix anything. The feeds came up on the main screens. Cameras glided past torn decks, collapsed superstructures, mouths of rusted hatches. Rope rot on ancient rigging, buckled hulls on ironclads. Modern steel torn open like paper. Water streamed past every surface, peeling loose scraps and drawing them inward. Anything not firmly fused into the column slid along with the flow. The crew stared. Even men who had seen combat fell quiet. Battle damage comes with violence and noise. This was steady, patient destruction. "Keep us at this range," Pierce ordered. "Slow orbit. Nothing closer to the center until we understand what holds those hulks in place." We began our watch. That should have been the end of the day. The trench had other plans. Tally went first. He sat with his head bent over his sonar console, fingers resting on controls, eyes half closed as he listened. Sonar operators often worked that way, hearing more than they saw. Midshift. I leaned on the rail behind Pierce's chair, watching drone feeds. Ashwin tracked gravity drift. Lindholm watched hull identities the way a butcher watches livestock. Tally stiffened. His hands twitched once, then went still. "Tally!" Pierce turned toward him. "Report." No response. The petty officer at the adjacent console reached over and shook his shoulder. "Tally, wake up!" Tally did not move. His eyes were wide open, pupils fixed, face slack. I stepped down and moved to him. A pulse beat steady in his neck. He breathed normally. No sign of seizure. "Get medical," Pierce ordered. "Now." Before anyone could move, Tally started speaking. At first it sounded like nonsense, a string of sounds that matched no language I knew. Then the pattern clicked. An old tongue. I had spent enough years in various ports to recognize its rhythm. He spoke in an archaic dialect sailors once used on sail training ships and coastal traders centuries before modern fleets. He was not just babbling. He threw orders, demanded bearing corrections, cursed a helmsman. His hands moved over his sonar board as if it was something else entirely. "Tally." I gripped his shoulder. He did not look at me. His eyes focused on something beyond the console. More orders in that old dialect. He called for the crew to haul lines, to brace for a turn. Medical arrived but held back, unsure whether to intervene. I translated what I could under my breath. Tally snarled that the current had turned wrong, that the sea beneath them was opening into a shaft, that the captain needed to abandon the attempt. He groped for a wheel that was not there. The way he spoke, the terms he used, the fear, all fit a mid-age exploratory vessel in trouble. No radar, no sonar, no engines, only canvas, wood, and blind instinct. His hands clenched on imaginary ropes. He flinched as if waves struck over railings we could not see. He cried a hoarse warning to turn away from the pit ahead, then fell silent. He blinked. His gaze snapped back to the sonar screen. Sweat beaded his forehead. "What just happened?" He looked around at us. "Why are you all staring at me?" "You don't remember anything?" I asked. "Remember what?" He checked his board, confused. "I was listening to the returns. There was this tone off in the distance. I tuned in and now you're all looking at me like I just sang a hymn." I asked what language he thought he'd been using. He frowned and said he had only spoken standard. The medic checked his pupils and reflexes. Everything looked normal. We recorded his episode, logged it, kept him on station. That was my decision. I told myself one incident did not justify panic. Later, when we played back the audio, he listened with his jaw slack. He understood words that had never been taught to him. He could now tie knots he had never learned in training, sailor work from another age. His hands moved in patterns his own history could not explain. That was our first brush with the other lives. More followed. The next hit came in engineering. Painter and his crew were running stress checks after a small trim adjustment. Engineers always watch gauges and listen to machinery, even when nothing is wrong. The research boat carried modern systems but older men. The habit stayed. Kem, one of the younger mechanics, stood near a panel watching coolant flow. He had come up through the modern training pipeline, all digital boards and simulation work. He froze mid-step, hand in the air. "Power to port shaft," he snapped. His accent shifted, suddenly rougher from a coast far from his listed home. Painter looked up from his own work. "What are you doing?" Kem ignored him. He slammed his hand onto a set of controls, fingers landing with precision on switches and dials that had no function on the panel in front of him. He called for depth charges to be secured, for the helm to ease them out of a starboard turn, for speed to stay below a certain number of knots to avoid stressing the hull. The words came in the clipped cadence of Second World War battle drill. The jargon matched warship engineering, not a research submarine's cool rooms. He complained about drag as the ship slid sideways toward a massive shaft in the water. He cursed enemy aircraft overhead and the limitations of their sonar. He railed at a captain who insisted on pressing an approach against doctrine. Then he cried out once, a raw sound, flinched, and folded at the waist. He braced for an impact that did not come. When his body straightened again, he stared at the panel in front of him. Peña had a hand on his shoulder. "You with us, Kem?" "Chief, yes, I think so." "Tell me the last thing you remember before this moment," I asked later in the small evaluation room off the infirmary. He recited routine checks, coolant lines, main bus voltages, pressure balances. "Nothing else? No destroyer, no charges, no trench under fire?" He shook his head, then hesitated. "There was something strange," he admitted. "I know how to check feed lines on old boilers now. I can picture the chambers. I know where the manual cutoff valves sit on a destroyer I've never even seen on a screen." He studied his hands. "I can feel the wrenches." The pattern was emerging. Every time gravity readings twitched harder than usual, someone went away, sometimes for a breath, sometimes longer. Every time they came back with something that did not belong. Skills, phrases, postures, a way of standing, of saluting, of glancing at the wrong corner of the room when an alarm rang. We drew blood. We checked for embolisms, toxins, misfiring neurons. Nothing. Ashwin watched his graphs. "The episodes match the worst of the drift," he told us in a tight briefing in the wardroom. "When the mass readings slip hardest, someone splits. The timing fits. So something in that core grabs people at those moments," Pierce concluded, "and drops them back. In other ships," Lindholm muttered, "ships that came here and never left." Tally sat in the corner, staring at his hands. He had begun wrapping his fingertips with twine. Old sailor habit. "Do we pull back?" Pierce looked at me. All eyes in the room followed. That was the weight they had hired me to carry. Not to be a hero, to make a choice others could blame later. "What do you expect to find closer in?" I asked Ashwin. "Higher drift, stronger current, more of the same likely." "Is the boat physically at risk at this range?" "Not yet. We have margin. The inward flow is strong, but we're holding without extreme thrust." "If we retreat now," Lindholm cut in, "we go home with stories of men who thought they were on other ships. That's not enough to justify the expense of this mission. We need data." "You want names for your loss files," I said. "I want to stop paying for unknowns," he said. I thought about it. The ocean does not care about our decisions. It punishes all of them the same way. Institutions care, and they live longer than any captain. "We stay for now," I decided. "We hold position. We do not go closer until we have a better sense of the limits. We log every episode and bring back what we can. If men come back with skills, we use them. If they do not come back at all, we mark it." "You treat this as psychological hazard," Pierce said. "I've stood watches over men who saw things at depth that were not there," I answered. "We managed. Until this starts tearing metal, we treat it like any other invisible pressure. We put it on the roster and watch it." At the time, that felt reasonable. It was my first wrong call. The next man did not return as himself. He was an ordinary crewman, 19, maybe 20. Navies thrive on the young. Quiet, competent, unremarkable. He had grown up with smartphones and flat screens, not with canvas and rivets. During a maintenance round in the mid-corridors, he froze. The man walking beside him later reported that he stiffened, grabbed the hatch frame, and stared down the passage with a focused anger that had never been his. "You, boy, name." His accent snapped into a coastal dialect more than a century old. The partner thought he was joking. "Come on, Mills. You're on mid-shift. Save the stories." Mills answered with words none of us used. He demanded the man's station, the ship's name, the captain, the current port. When they brought him to me, he walked with the stiff precision of a petty officer from another era. He gave his own name without hesitation, but it was not the one on his badge. He rattled off his service history. A late 19th century cruiser under a flag that existed only in old books. Battles in narrow seas. Port calls at harbours we now knew as tourist cities and scrapyards. He asked how he had survived the trench. "We were pulled," he explained. "Hull creaked. Water everywhere. The whole ship turned toward a shaft in the sea. I remember falling. Then I wake up here." He ran his hands over the corridor walls. "Steel, new, no rivets, no portholes. What is this boat?" We tested him. Asked about his family. He gave names, addresses, small stories. Ashwin cross-checked them with old archives. They matched records for a petty officer whose ship had never returned from a deep training cruise more than a century before. There was no trace of the young man we had brought aboard from a modern recruitment center. He did not remember his parents, his schooling, his partner, his phone. He did not know what a smartphone was. We put him on light duty and watched for signs that our Mills might emerge. He never did. The other crew started avoiding him. Some disliked the way he listened to the hull, as if it could warn him before it gave. Some simply hated how his eyes slid past their modern insignia as if it meant nothing. I watched him drill younger sailors in old knots. His hands moved with an easy competence his body should not have had. This was more than stress and noise. We stayed. Communications from the surface began to split. At first, orders came in clean. Continue mapping, maintain distance, prioritize data collection, standard risk language. Then a pull-out order arrived. Command recommends immediate withdrawal. Psychological incidents on board unacceptable. Mission to be rescheduled with further preparation. We logged it. Pierce and I stood over the console, reading each line twice. Half an hour later, another message came through. The route looked the same, seals appeared valid, but the content differed. Command directs continued approach. Deployment of limited charges around anomaly authorized for purposes of structural analysis. Withdrawal contingent on completion of package. Timestamps fought each other. The second message marked itself as both later and earlier, depending on which internal reference we used. It made no sense. Verify, Pierce told the comms officer. He tried. Every time he called up, a different operator answered. Some used old call signs. Some used new ones. Some referred to us as if we had been on station for days longer than we had. We played it cautious. We asked security questions only true current command should know. We got conflicting answers. "Something's in the line," the comms man muttered. "Traffic record looks wrong. Messages out of sequence." Even so, a pattern emerged. One higher authority wanted us to pull back and write this off. Another wanted more data, more aggression, more proof. It looked like politics. It might have been that. It also might have been something else. I thought of old stories soldiers tell. Ask 3 generals how to take a hill, get 3 orders and a court-martial. This felt like that, with gravity behind it. Eyes turned to me again. "Which orders do we follow?" Pierce asked. "Physically, we're still within safe margin," Ashwin reminded us. "The episodes are concerning, but the hull is solid. The inward pull is manageable." Lindholm rubbed his temple. "If you leave now, every boardroom on my side will assume you blinked. We'll lose the chance to settle decades of disputes." "And if we stay and lose the boat?" Pena asked, arms folded. "Then we have an answer," Lindholm replied. "We know the well eats more than stories." I watched them and listened to the engine noise through the deck. "Deploy controlled charges along the outer region," I decided. "No direct strike on the core. Pattern them to test structural response in the wrecks. We treat the aggressive order as the current one. If the withdrawal command was truly final, they'll send it again, clearly, over and over. They haven't done that. Risk? Pierce asked. Measured, Ashwin answered. Assuming we stay at this range. Fine. We poke it. If it pokes back, at least we learn something. Penner muttered under his breath and walked away to adjust power schedules. It was an ugly choice, but in war and deep research you rarely get better. You pick the damage you think you understand. We placed the charges using remote vehicles. The drones moved through the wrecks, guided by operators who now remembered many kinds of ships. One contractor swore he had flown similar drones before on a boat that had not yet been built. He used procedures none of our manuals contained, but they worked. The charges were small, precise blocks set near key structural joints on derelict hulls, timed to detonate in sequence. The goal was to watch the column flex. From the control room, the operation looked almost tidy. Drones slid past twisted decks, planted their loads, backed away. Indicators turned from green to amber as timers armed. Detonations in 3 minutes, Ashwin reported. We watched the screens. When the time came, the first explosion lit the column interior for a heartbeat. Flashes marched along old decks and through broken windows. Metal and wood broke again. Sensors watched gravity flow. At first, nothing dramatic. Pieces of wreck shook loose, then slid inward, drawn toward the invisible core faster than before. The inward water flow spiked. Ashwin frowned at his graphs. Then the mass readings surged. The entire trench felt like it had taken a breath. The inward pull on our hull strengthened. Loose objects in the cabin shifted toward the column side. Thrusters! Counter! Pierce snapped. Engines roared. The boat fought to hold station. The current dragged at the bow, trying to turn us toward the center. On sonar, the column changed. New shapes slipped into range from above, dropping out of the darkness. Tally's hands flew over his board. New entries on upper perimeter, he reported. Large hulls. 1 container ship. 1 bulk carrier. 1 design unknown. We watched the video feeds as the newcomers spiraled into place. The container ship bore markings Lindholm recognized from a recent dispute. Officially, it had sunk in a storm years before, with limited evidence. Now, it slid into the well, like it had been waiting its turn. Another hull carried markings from a navy that did not exist in our world. Its flag showed a continent under a configuration of stars that matched no state on any of our maps. As they entered the column, the inward twist took them. Steel bent. Fixtures tore loose. They rotated nose inward, joining the queue. Transfer episodes on board spiked. Men and women dropped out of themselves mid-step. Some inhabited future crews screaming about anti-gravity nets and phase shields, devices we did not have. Others came back drenched in memories of wooden decks soaked in seawater, open gun bays, burning oil. One woman in the medical bay went rigid, then began throwing orders in a language used by a navy that had never formed in our political history. She described a disaster under an admiral whose name meant nothing to us, but whose rank and responsibilities felt real. We lost count of the incidents. Logs filled with partial reports and confused timings. At least 3 crew never returned as themselves. Their bodies remained, but whoever had warned them before the mission was gone. Strangers walked the corridors, some from centuries past, some from futures that might never happen now. The boat felt less like a single ship and more like a meeting point. We had stirred the well. It reached deeper into its stock. We stayed anyway. The crew turned into a mosaic. I woke one morning to find 2 of my bridge watch saluting in the style of an empire long collapsed. Their boots hit the deck with a sharper stamp. Their eyes cut differently. In the mess, half the tables followed modern etiquette, half clung to older rules. A young cook refused to serve certain meals on certain days because, in his borrowed life, those days belonged to fasting before deployment. Tally's language drifted. He used archaic sea terms for modern instruments. speaking of range as if it were a line of horizon instead of a sonic sweep. He worked his modern board with the rhythm of a sail-age lookout. The petty officer from the 19th century cruiser ran rope drills in a storage bay, working knots and splices on synthetic line with hands that remembered hemp and tar. Men who had never tied anything more complex than a shoe picked it up quickly, as if their fingers shared the memory. Future crews showed as well. One contractor dropped into a persona who knew doctrine for dealing with deep gravity anomalies. He talked about standard standoff distances and a ring of autonomous probes placed at key radii. "Why are we listening to a hallucination?" Pena demanded during a planning session. Ashwin rubbed his eyes. "He has technical details that match nothing in our archives, but line up internally. His descriptions of equipment we don't have are consistent. Either this is an elaborate fantasy, or we're getting a glimpse of a program in some other line of history. It's all stories until something breaks," Pena grumbled. "It's already breaking," I reminded him. "I chose to treat the useful pieces as tools. That habit cost us later. We built a new watch structure around the composites. The petty officer from the old cruiser took certain training roles. He knew how to keep men moving despite fear. Tally, with his sail-age awareness, could read shifts in water flow the instruments barely registered. The contractor with future doctrine knowledge helped Ashwin design a monitoring ring. We planned it as a ring of sensors placed around the well at different ranges. Each unit would watch gravity, mass flow, current, and relay data upward until it died. Even if we had to withdraw, the anomaly would not go unwatched. We needed someone who understood how to place them so the core's pull would not simply drag them all in at once. That was where the future doctrine came in. The man, when inside that persona, spoke of choking points and last stable shells, like he had studied them. On paper, the plan made sense. In practice, it meant moving closer again, threading drones through the wrecks at more dangerous distances. "Every time we use one of these ghosts, we give it more room inside us," Pena warned one night in the wardroom. He nursed a mug of thick coffee, eyes shadowed. "You're turning the crew into a committee of the dead and unborn." "We're already that," I answered. "The question is whether we bring something back, or just join them. You've always been good at giving pretty reasons for ugly work. That's why you keep me around." He snorted and went back to his drink. We deployed the ring. Drones carried sensor pods out, following paths plotted by men who half remembered running similar operations on boats that had never been built. The pods anchored awkwardly around the column, broadcasting faint signals as the water pulled at them. For a while, it went smoothly. Then we hit a wreck. The boat brushed an old hull, a twisted piece of iron that stuck into our path like a broken rib. The impact was not catastrophic. Metal ground on metal. The hull shuddered. Alarms rang. "Minor external contact port side," Pena reported. "Damage to sensor frame. Possible fin distortion." We adjusted depth, compensating. The inward pull from the well felt stronger. The margin we had counted on shrank. "We're inside where we planned to be," Ashwin warned. "The gravity gradient at this distance is steeper. Small changes in position will have bigger effects." "Can we still get out?" Pierce asked. "If we don't make more mistakes, yes," I answered. Everyone heard the catch. We kept going. The anomaly started sending me myself. The first time it happened, I woke from a doze in my bunk and did not know which ship my hands belonged to. I stood on a different bridge. The boat under me was smaller, thinner, a dedicated patrol submarine with its nose pointed at a dark patch on sonar. Uniforms around me bore my own flag alone. The insignia on my chest matched my younger years. Men on watch called me Captain Vogel, with a tone that mixed respect and fear. We had orders to investigate a deep gravity anomaly in another trench, far from the current one. Doctrine was clear this time. Approach, record, avoid engagement. Someone behind a desk had already learned from something. We did not follow that advice. In that life, I told myself I could get closer, glimpse the edge of the core, then pull out. I made small adjustments to depth and heading, thought I was clever, thought I had outsmarted stiff protocol. I watched the numbers creep and decided they could creep a little further. The well took us. The boat slid sideways into a column of wrecks, different vessels than those around our current location, arranged on the same pattern. We tried to fight the inward flow, emergency ballast blows, thrusters, anything. Our hull buckled, men screamed. The control room rotated as the ship twisted toward a point with no visible substance. Dying that way strips out every story you ever told yourself about gallantry. It reduces you to noise, steel, and a force that does not care. Then I was back on my bunk, breathing hard, hands gripping the thin mattress. The cabin belonged to the research boat again. The air was still. I checked the date on my watch. I checked the mission log. I waited for the memory to fade like a dream. It did not. I could recall every detail of that other control room, the names of the men, the precise moment I had decided to ignore doctrine. The well had let me watch my own failure from some branch of history where I never retired. After that, crew returned from episodes with stories that included me. One engineer, in the grip of a future persona, described serving under Captain Vogel on a sleek anomaly response vessel. He remembered my face older, lined differently. He remembered me insisting on sampling a core region at an angle others considered reckless. He remembered dying with my last orders still ringing. "You like to lean on the danger zone," he told me later in his normal voice. Awkward. "Even when you tell others to be cautious." Another man came back from a Cold War patrol boat, convinced I had led them on a deep incursion into disputed waters. The boat in that memory had found something like our column, half-formed. We had tried to treat it as an enemy device. It had eaten us. In every story, I made the same kind of mistake, thinking I could manage a force that did not negotiate. I did not tell the others about my own episode. There is only so much doubt you can show a crew. In the wardroom, during yet another strategy discussion, I watched the others argue. Ashwin spread graphs like cards. "The ring is working. Sensors at different ranges confirm the well is growing, slowly but steadily. The mass inside the column increases every few hours. We need long-term data to know why." "The crew is coming apart," Peña reminded him. "We have men who don't know which war they fought in. Some remember battles that never happened." "We've lived through worse," Lindholm muttered. "History's full of wars that never should have happened either. People keep going." "That is not comfort," I told him. Tally shifted in his seat. "We can't stay much longer without losing more people," he said. "Even if the hull holds, we're turning into a museum with the lights on." I had heard those words before, in another hull, from another Tally. The well loved repetitions. I made a choice that felt clever and brave. It was neither. "We changed the pattern," I declared. "Every time I've seen myself go close in these glimpses, I was following doctrine or reacting slow. This time, we do the opposite of what feels familiar. We adjust depth and lateral position away from those remembered tracks. We climb at an angle I've never taken. We hold where no version of me has stood." "Based on visions," Peña said. "Based on cross-referenced experiences," Ashwin countered. "Multiple glimpses align on certain behaviors. The captain wants to step off that line." "Do you truly think you can outmaneuver something that uses time like rope?" Lindholm asked me. "I don't think anything," I answered. "I only know what happens if we sit still and follow the same path. I've watched that ending now, more than once. We altered course. Maybe that changed something. Maybe it only made the pattern more interesting to what sat in the core. Either way, the next surge hit harder. The well grabbed us. It began as a shiver in the hull, like distant thunder, then climbed. Instruments screamed warnings. Gravity readings spiked off chart. The inward water flow surged. Full reverse thrust, Pierce ordered. Trim for climb. Now. The boat responded at first, nose rising, then something caught us from the side. The entire hull lurched. We slammed into part of the wreck column. Lights flickered as systems took the hit. Consoles spat error messages. "We've got contact on starboard bow," Pena called from engineering. "Hull plating stressed. No immediate breach, but we're scraping along the column." On external cameras, the view twisted. Wrecks loomed close. An ancient sail hull slid past, side torn out, planks splintered. A Second World War destroyer's broken mast scraped along our frame. A modern container ship's skeletal remains rattled against us. Then our corridors changed. In one mid-passage, a crewman opened a door that should have led to a storage locker. Instead, he stepped into a rusted stairwell under dim red lighting. The air was wrong, but the pressure held as if the space were sealed. The metal had a different age. He stood in the staircase of another ship, one currently being pulled into the column beside us. He barely had time to shout before the door swung shut behind him. When other crew forced it open, the locker was back, full of folded blankets and spare parts. In another compartment, a wall folded inward as if pushed. The corridor beyond had shifted. Windows that had never existed now faced a churning dark sea. Men staring through them watched old hulls slide past at impossible angles, close enough to touch. The boat was being threaded through other ships. Our hull intersected with theirs as the well rearranged its collection. It did not tolerate stray pieces. It tried to bring us in line. We scrambled to sealed doors, reroute around breaches. The maps on the control room wall no longer matched the spaces men walked in. Sections that once connected now ended in blank steel. Others linked to places we did not trust. "Captain!" Pena shouted over the open circuit. "We're taking uneven stress along the spine. The core is trying to bend us. We're close to permanent deformation. If that happens, we join the column." He lifted his wrists, where diagrams of the ship's structure lived in his head. "We've got structural charges along key points. Emergency blowlines. They were meant to scuttle the boat in case of capture." "They can also cut parts of the hull away," I said. "Correct. If we fire them along segments Bravo and Charlie, we drop the damaged bow sections. The rest might pull out." "How many compartments do we lose?" He did not hesitate. 3 living sections, 1 engineering support bay, 1 makeshift brig. Anyone in those spaces gone. Alternative? "We ride it and hope the core gets bored." That was no option. In theory, we could try more mechanical tricks. Reverse thrust, ballast games, lateral jets. In practice, we already had. The boat still drifted inward, scraping past wrecks that had once been separate ships and now shared our walls. Another report crackled through. "The brig units are unstable," security called. "The composites in there are panicking. One has broken a restraint. They're trying to open hatches that no longer lead where they used to." Of course they were. The brig held several of the more volatile composites. The petty officer from the authoritarian state who believed our mission was treason. The future doctrine officer who wanted to drive us straight through the core. Loose in this, they would pull us in one way or another. I should have evacuated those compartments earlier. I had been too busy trying to keep all the pieces in play. I looked around the control room. Faces stared back. Some belonged to men I knew, some to strangers occupying my crew. "We fire the charges," I ordered. "Segments Bravo and Charlie. Hang warning on internal feed. Evacuate if you can hear my voice and you're in those sectors. You have 30 seconds. We broadcast the warning. Men ran. Some reached safer compartments. Others found doors that opened onto ship interiors from other centuries or from newcomers in the column and stepped through by mistake. It hardly mattered in the end. Pena armed the charges. "On your mark, Captain." There is no clean way to give that order. I made a small hand motion, keeping my voice level. "Do it!" The explosions rippled through the hull. The boat jumped as sections broke away. The sound came as a deep internal grind more than as sharp booms. On cameras, We watched parts of our own ship tumble clear, still faintly lit for seconds, full of moving shapes. They spun inward, drawn toward the core, colliding with old wrecks as they went. The remaining hull reeled outward. The inward pull stayed strong, but without the forward mass the well had less leverage. Engines flared, thrusters screamed. We clawed our way sideways, then up, away from the tightest gradient. The cost rolled in as status boards updated, whole sections lit red, life support offline, no response from multiple compartments. We had carved a smaller boat out of a larger one, like cutting a damaged fruit to save a slice. I stood on the control deck and listened to the damage reports, each neat sentence covering raw events. Life signs lost in sections Bravo 2 and 3. Contact lost with brig personnel. Engine support Bay Delta gone. Penner kept his voice calm, delivering the news like a man reading numbers off a log. In another part of the ship, the petty officer from the long-vanished cruiser grabbed the wall as his world tilted. He had survived one deep disaster, only to meet another because I had put him in a box I was willing to lose. We pulled away from the worst of the well. The inward pull eased but did not vanish. The column sat behind us, throng of wrecks twisting slowly, new additions joining the line. My choices defined who remained on my ship. I had cut away those I saw as least controllable or most expendable. It had not been bravery. It had been triage. We started climbing. Ascent is never peaceful, even in normal water. You climb back through layers of pressure and darkness, all of it wanting you to stay. Do it in a damaged hull with a mixed crew, and everything sharpens. The smaller boat moved unsteadily. We had lost control surfaces and sensors. The remaining thrusters worked harder, drawing on power systems Painter had patched together from what was left. Transfer episodes continued, but frayed. Some crew dropped into one life for a breath, then another for the next. Their voices shifted mid-sentence. A man would start a report in modern jargon and finish it listing sail positions. Others stabilized in stranger ways. The petty officer from the 19th century cruiser had gone with the forward cutaway segment. The young body he wore no longer walked our decks. In his place, we now had a man who remembered serving under me on a future anomaly boat and who viewed our vessel as primitive. He tried to impose that persona's doctrine on our situation. On the command deck, he stepped close to my chair and leaned in. "We're leaving the well uncontained," he told me. "You know what happens when you do that." "I know what happens when we try to seal it with what we have," I answered. "We join the column. In my first life under you, we lost the boat trying to ram the core. In the second, we lost it when we tried to nail it in place with fields we barely understood. In the third, we stayed too far back, and it expanded anyway. You keep looking for a middle line that hurts least." "Then tell me, what do we do now?" He opened his mouth, then faltered. "I don't know this configuration. It's off script." "Good. Let it stay that way. Get back to your station." He bristled, then walked away. In other parts of the ship, the composites became more risk than resource. One man, caught in a loop of drowning deaths, tried to open an airlock mid-ascent. He babbled about needing to get to a boat deck. Security dragged him away and strapped him down. Another, a future officer convinced by his training that diving through the core was the only exit, tried to sabotage ballast controls to force us back down. Painter caught the anomaly in flow readings and locked out his access in time. I changed how I handled them. Earlier, I had used their skills. Now, I treated them as unstable munitions. We sedated those whose allegiance could not be trusted. We locked some in sealed cabins and throttled local life support to safe minimums. In 2 cases where sabotage attempts nearly cost us the engines, I authorized venting small compartments and told myself there had been no other option. By the time we cleared the steepest gradient, the crew still awake and on duty were either mostly themselves or mostly one borrowed persona that could follow orders. The boat felt hollow. Voices in the corridors carried more space between them. Comms sputtered as we climbed. We raised the surface once, got nothing but static, then tried again. The third attempt brought in a clear channel. The voice on the other end used protocols from my early career, old call signs, familiar code words that had fallen out of style. Deep survey vessel, confirm identity, transmit mission code. We did. The responses matched the format I had learned decades earlier, not the updated one in our current manuals. Your mission has exceeded its planned window, the controller told us. You will be recovered under full blackout conditions. Cover story remains joint mapping and salvage. Expect immediate close debrief on arrival. That voice felt safe in its way. It matched my instincts and training. Men of that doctrine believed in containing knowledge, controlling panic, maintaining the surface illusion of order. On another attempt, a different channel answered. This time, the protocols were newer, more aggressive. The operator told us to confirm anomaly contact, then went quiet when we did. Order from Strategic Command, he continued after a pause. You are to scuttle your vessel in place and erase all records. No ascent authorized. Contact with that phenomenon cannot reach the surface. He delivered it like a sentence. On yet another call, a third voice answered, referencing joint task forces that did not exist in our timeline, orders signed under treaty names that meant nothing. The lines themselves had become muddled, like the hulls in the column. We had to choose whom to believe. Pierce stared at the map, depth readouts, damage logs. He looked older than when we had left port. Option 1, he said quietly. We stay down and die quietly. Whatever this thing does, it does without us. Maybe that keeps the world untouched for a while. Option 2, we go up and take with us whatever has nested in our hull and in us. Option 3, Lindholm added dryly. We go up, lie about what we saw, and the people above us use the fragments wrong. That one's happening no matter what, I told him. I thought about the branches I had seen. In almost all of them, my boat died near a well, and the world forgot. The anomaly kept feeding regardless. The only change was who knew about it next. For the first time in a long career, I did not trust a scuttling order. Is there any guarantee that sinking ourselves here stops this thing? I asked Ashwin. None, he answered. By the time we knew how to look, the column had already existed for centuries. It has eaten ships across eras and states. Our absence doesn't switch it off. It may not even register our loss. Any guarantee that if we go up we don't spread whatever this is? He looked tired. None, he repeated. For once, Captain, Lindholm added, your decision won't change the big picture. The difference is whether we mobilize resources with evidence or keep writing checks in the dark. Cynical. Also true. I chose the orders that matched my habits, which is to say the ones that offered control. We ascend, I decided. We accept recovery. We contain this at the institutional level and hope that's enough. No noble self-destruction? Payne asked quietly. I don't believe in noble deaths, I answered. Only useful ones. Dying down there now would be neither. We ignored the scuttling command. We obeyed the quieter voice that promised docks and debrief rooms. Another misreading, maybe. Hard to tell when the opponent plays with time. We climbed. Recovery at the surface looked ordinary. We broke through grey water under a low sky. Support ships closed in, lines flew, hatches opened. Fresh air hit faces used to filtered systems. Men climbed down into our boat with weapons and medical kits. They stopped when they saw the survivors. Many of us wore uniforms that matched the mission patch. Others wore pieces from other eras. A bandana here, an old-style cap there. One man had tattooed his forearm with a symbol from a navy that had never existed, convinced it was his service mark. Another moved with the straight back of an officer from a state long gone. Our visitors pressed on. They checked compartments, counted bodies, secured classified gear. I stood on the damp deck and watched the flags on the support ships. Something in them was off. A stripe added here, A symbol moved there. Small differences most observers would miss, but a man who had lived under particular colors could not. Names on the hulls had changed as well. One ship bore a memorial plaque listing previous vessels in its line. There were more names than there should have been. Some referred to disasters I had never heard of. We were not returning to the exact world we had left. It felt like a close cousin. They took us into quarantine. Medics drew blood. Psychologists asked about our sense of identity and time. Intelligence officers watched through glass. I told them what had happened. Not all of it. Enough. I described the column of wrecks, the inward flow, the way every hull aimed at the unseen point. I explained the gravity drift, the mass readings that refused to settle. I gave them Tally's experience of the sail vessel's last turn, Kem's time in the destroyer, the petty officer from the old cruiser emerging in a young body. I mentioned the structural charges and the sections we cut away. I noted the loss of the brig and the men inside. I made sure they understood that we had not come back intact by any measure. I did not talk about watching myself die in other branches. I did not mention ships from futures not yet built, except in vague terms. I did not describe how comms had delivered variant versions of their own orders. You cannot give an institution too much truth at once. It is like throwing a fresh recruit into a storm and telling him the ocean has always been like this. He panics. He makes bad choices. The panels tore my report apart among themselves. Navies argued about containment operations. Some wanted to throw everything at the trench, try to bury the well under explosives and classified hulls. Others counseled patience and study. Insurers pulled their own threads. They recalculated loss curves, quietly adjusted policies for shipping near similar trenches, added small clauses in fine print about anomalous gravitational events. Science teams salivated over the data from the monitoring ring. What little had survived the surge showed the well growing. New arrivals appeared on the column map even after we left. Some bore names of ships that, on our side, still had years of service left. The official story released to the world mentioned only a near loss due to deep structural stress, a heroic crew, and lessons for future missions. No hint of temporal bleed reached the press. Survivors were divided. Some were quietly retired with pensions and medical coverage. A few went into long-term care when their grip on this timeline never quite set. Others, especially those with useful composite skills, moved into new roles. Tally went to a deep monitoring unit tasked with watching gravity surveys in trenches around the globe. Kem joined a weapons development program that officially had nothing to do with anomaly response, but used his mixed knowledge of old and new engineering. I received a rank bump and an advisory title. Along with it came a small office in a coastal headquarters, limited travel rights, and an unspoken understanding that I was not to step onto an active boat again. They wanted me close enough to question and far enough to box. My days became a rotation of debriefs, consultations, and staring at new gravity plots. The monitoring ring continued to broadcast, though several nodes had failed. Ashwin, now embedded in a research cell, sent regular summaries. The well's mass and reach ticked upward on every report. Sometimes at night, I walked through the base and looked at the memorial hall. Rows of plaques listed ships and crews lost over the decades. New plates had been added while I was underwater. Some bore names of vessels whose wrecks I had seen in the column. Families had attended ceremonies, flags had been folded, speeches made, all for ships that had not yet left port when we went down. History had adjusted to make room. I would stand there reading and feel the ground under my feet as something negotiable. We rarely spoke about the crew who walked out of my boat wearing lives from other worlds. They lived under new names now, sometimes in special facilities. Their old families had been told versions of the truth that left out the parts no one wanted to believe. Surface lore grew in small circles. Sailors on patrol talked about a trench you avoided. Insurer clerks passed jokes about a patch of sea where cargo and lives vanished into paperwork categories no one wanted to explain. The gorging well, they called it sometimes. A name born from boredom and unease. I did not correct them. I met with Lindholm a few times in windowless rooms. He seemed thinner. "We're adjusting portfolios," he told me once. "Rewriting risk models. There are now corridors we simply won't cover, no matter what shippers pay." "You think that will stop them?" I asked. "It'll stop some. The rest will go anyway. And when they join your column, maybe someone 20 years from now will have more data to work with." "You plan with that much optimism?" He gave a short, dry laugh. "No. I plan on the assumption this thing doesn't care about our spreadsheets, but I can at least stop us sending money into its mouth blindly." He pushed a folder across the table. "In there you'll find a proposal from a shipyard consortium. They want to build a new class of deep patrol vessel, equipped with richer sensors and a stronger hull. They want to name the lead ship after you." "Of course they do. The press release talks about your courage under the trench." "I cut parts of my own crew away to get out." "That's not how they tell it." I flipped the folder open. Architect sketches showed a sleek hull. The mission profile brief talked about anomaly monitoring. The name in bold at the top used my rank and surname. "If they build that boat and send it down," I remarked, "you know what happens." "Yes," he answered. "But if they don't, something else goes instead, with less preparation." We sat in silence. "Will you approve the use of your name?" he asked. "That's not my decision." "On paper it is. The committee wants your blessing. It makes their marketing cleaner." I closed the folder. "Do whatever you want," I told him. "Names don't help down there." He gathered the papers. "It's strange," he said. "You were brought in because you wouldn't talk. Now the only reason we have any handle on this is because you keep telling us what you saw. I haven't told you everything." "I know," he replied. "I'm not sure I want you to. The last time I visited the trench, I did it from a chair. The display in my office showed a feed from a new survey probe. Unmanned this time. Some lessons held. The probe dropped through water, instruments ticking. It reached the depth of the well and adjusted course to circle at the outer monitoring ring. The columns stood there, larger than before. New wrecks had joined. Some bore names I recognized from fresh memorial plaques. Others had hull lines I had never seen. One near the outer edge carried a half-finished flag. Paint crews had not completed the emblem before it went under. I recognized the outline of the symbol from the folder Lindholm had shown me. It was the shape of the badge for the vessel they planned to name after me. They had not yet laid that keel in our shipyard, not officially. The funding package still sat in committee. But there it was, already sliding inward on the well's own timeline. A boat from a near future, built on lessons drawn from my mission, following orders drafted in rooms I had sat in. The well did not only feed on past mistakes, it reached along probable lines, taking what it wanted in advance. I sat and watched the probe circle, sending back neat readings that would go into reports. Engineers would chart the growth, insurers would adjust models, admirals would nod and write plans. In a drawer beside me lay an unfinished briefing I had been asked to edit. It aimed to summarize the trench for senior officials and selected civilian partners. It outlined the anomaly as a gravity defect with complex temporal effects. It recommended continued unmanned monitoring and strict exclusion zones. It did not discuss communications out of sequence or the subtle changes in flags and treaties. It left out the crew who came back wrong. If I added those, the brief would turn from a tool into a warning. Warnings tend to be ignored or used to justify extremes. I picked up a pen. I crossed out a few lines that hinted too strongly at temporal bleed and replaced them with phrases like non-linear mass capture and persistent drift. Better to keep it inside the comfort zone of people who think in numbers and diagrams. That choice meant they would treat the well as a manageable hazard instead of as a hole in history. Once you start treating something like that, you design systems around it instead of trying to stamp it out. Systems spread. That is what they do. When I finished the edits, I signed my name at the bottom. My hand did not tremble. I had long ago used up the energy for that kind of reaction. Someone knocked on the office door. "Come." Tally stepped in. He looked older too, hair silver at the edges. His eyes still carried that listening scan, as if sonar never quite turned off. "Got a message from Ashwin's group," he told me. "They think they've identified another trench with a similar profile, smaller, early stage maybe. They want a mission. They always do." He watched the screen over my shoulder, where the column hung. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we'd walked away when the first kid started talking like an old sailor?" he asked. "All the time," I answered. "Those ships were already there, 10 years ago, a century ago, longer. We didn't start it. We fed it," he said. He stood there a while longer, then turned to go. "You'll be at the next briefing?" he asked at the door. "Yes." "They'll ask if we can keep this contained. I'll tell them we can keep it watched," I answered. "Containment is a story they tell themselves." He gave a small nod and left. I turned back to the feed one more time. The probe passed close to a hull from some future fleet. Its panels were smooth, its lines too clean. The emblem near its bow did not belong to any flag in our world. Men and women had walked those decks in their present, obeying orders, believing their mission mattered. Now their final moments would be shredded and stitched into other lives, as mine had been. The well would keep eating. It did not need our permission. Through our orders, our experiments, and our need for understanding, we had chosen to let it eat parts of us as well. Names, doctrines, hull designs, and quiet old captains who thought they could stand at the edge and not be noticed. I closed the report, turned off the display, and sat alone in a room full of familiar walls that might not match the ones I remembered. That was the end of my story and not the end of the trench. The ocean keeps its own records. We just help with the filing.